Okay guys, so super fun one this week. You can see I've got a user table here with a form open, and she's got a password, and I can set the password, and once that function is done we have this one-way hash that appears, and that is quite a strong password protection. And we can test against that by typing in some other password, and we can get the result from our function that we're creating. And so we can put the wrong one in. If we put the right one in though, we can process that user as we need to. I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie. Thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. In our last episode on encryption, we sort of integrated some .NET stuff so that we could have two-way encryption in our Microsoft Access database, and we could encrypt fields and then store some data in there, and then that data would be safe. If the files were ever stolen, they couldn't be decrypted by somebody else. But many of you were asking, hey, I would like to have a one-way hash function on there as well, so that I can use the same encryption for passwords. And so in this episode, I've added hashing to our little Encrypt utility, and we're going to use that to hash our passwords. Let's get to it. Interested in easy time entry for your business? Make sure to check out the additional links in the description. Okay, and many thanks to those users who requested this. It's a nice little feature upgrade for our Encrypt utility. And so you can see here today I've got this little Access Encrypt database. I'm going to put all these files on my downloads page. Make sure you guys go there and check it out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that I downloaded this. You guys can get this file from the download page there, and you can put it in your folder with whatever database you're working with. And similar to how we processed this before, we'll go ahead and unzip it. Just like you saw before, you'll see some files in there after you unzip it into your folder. And there's our encrypt connection strings. We're going to show how to use that later. Encrypt is our little utility that we're using that allows us to access the .NET environment. And then we've got our config file, and that's going to have important stuff in it, as well as this little text document. And this has some stuff in it that we're going to actually copy and paste directly into our Access database, just like we did before. We'll do a right-click select all on the content of that notepad document there, and we're going to paste that either into a new module, or we can paste it into the same module that we used last time if you're following from the previous lesson. And so this is the one we created last time. It was mod encrypt there. If you want to create a new module, you can just go to the create ribbon and click on new module and then paste in the contents. We'll double click this one today since this is what we were using last time. And you can see there's this function in here, encrypt or decrypt, which we used on sensitive data fields. And what we can do is we can select all on everything in that module, and then we can just paste over it with the contents of the text file. And your existing application, if you're using an older version of Encrypt, it will also work with this paste in here, this content. But we've got one change here, that is that I've created the constant at the top here to make it a little bit easier. Just make sure you change that to the location where you are unpacking your Encrypt.exe, and then we're off to the races. So you can save that module, and then now we've got our database ready to go. We've changed our install location, and we've got a couple of different functions in here. So last time we had the install location in the middle of the procedure, and now we're just putting it, now we're changing the value at the very top of the procedure, or top of the module I should say. Now this line here, this is many thanks to user brought that up. Sometimes there is a carriage return on the end of some of the return values, and so that one strips it off if that is included in the return values. And so that's good to go. We've got our function set up there, and this is what we had last time. Just like I said, your functions will still work if you paste in what we've got there. So select the field and you can hit encrypt there, and you can hit decrypt and it will decrypt it. So if you encrypt it and save it and close it all for the night and leave, and then the files get poached or somebody breaks in and takes them, you can be sure that the data that's in those fields will be very, very, very hard to see. And so that's what we wanted to do here. You can see we can encrypt and decrypt. That was the original function that we created in our SmackEncrypt, and this current version will work with the previous version if that's the one that you installed. And so we can go ahead and test this out here. So I'll clear the immediate window. There's a bit of testing stuff going in the output there, but just like we did before, we can use our encrypt or decrypt function in the following way. And so if you're writing some VBA, you can use this function. I'll do it in the immediate window here, so we'll put question mark and then encrypt or decrypt, and we'll say encrypt. That'll be our option, and then we'll put in the value that we want to encrypt. So we'll put in, say, if it was a credit card number or something like that, we could put that value in there. You might have it in a field or something, and so there you go. That would be the encrypted value for that, and that is triple DES or 3DES as they call it, encryption, and it's pretty strong. I think it's a pretty good one, and if you make a very good passphrase in your config file, that's going to make a big difference to the strength of it. So we can also decrypt it, so I can say decrypt, and I could put that that value back in there, so I can get that value back out again, so we can look at it if we're working on credit cards or something like that. Now, what is new in this episode is that we have a new option for our encrypt or decrypt function, and it's called get hash. And so this would be the first time that a password is used, or something that you never need to have the value back for, you just need to be able to compare to. So we're going to put in, my funky password ABC123 exclamation. That would be an example of a password, and then when we hit enter after that, you can see now we've got this hash here. Now that has been first encrypted and then hashed. It has not been signed, which is another layer of security, but it's pretty strong, and that would be very, very difficult to get the value back from. So we cannot get the value back after it's been hashed using the 256-bit .NET provider there. So what we are able to do is we can check it though. We can say, is this the value that's in there? So we can do a hash check, and that's a new function in our database here. And you can see if I put in some other password and then I compare it against the hash that's stored in the field or that we used, that's not going to work. So that password compared against the original in its hash form does not work, and we get a fail there. So that's our hash function. So if I paste in the right password and I compare that using the hash, it goes through the encryption and the hash, and it gets a pass. If I put in ASDF, it gets a fail. And so that's sort of that function there. That's the hash check. That is also a new feature that's in there, so you guys can go ahead and use that in your project. You can see there we get some feedback. We get a fail or a pass, and actually we can change those in our SmackEncrypt utility to be some other code so that it's not so easy if somebody tries to figure it out. You can actually change your pass or fail return values so that they're unique to your application. So if I look at this SmackEncrypt.exe in a notepad here, you can see we've got some new connection string features here, and that was my Encrypt password. Make sure you put a nice long one, like 20 characters or more, in there for that password. But now we've got a pass or fail, and you can put in your own thing. You can say, you know, no way for fail, or like, yep, you passed, and then use that, and that will be harder for people to figure out. Now you might be wondering, well, can't I just look at the config file and get the password so I can encrypt everything? Well, the answer is no, because we're going to use our little encrypt connect strings utility here, and we're going to demonstrate some of the power that is in the Windows system here. We're going to use our little utility. We're going to protect our file, and what this little utility does is it encrypts the connection strings in a particular section of the document. So now if I grab the config file again, you can see, oh, I can't read any of the connection string data anymore. And if I take off the word wrap there, this is more of what it looks like in the file. So you've got that, you know, cipher data section there, and all of that stuff is totally scrambled, and nobody's going to be able to read that if they steal the files off of your computer. And so that's really cool, but you might be wondering, well, how does the application read it? Well, that's all sort of built into how the configuration works using Configuration Manager, which is something that we used in our .NET utility there. And so now we can use all these features without having, you know, our password that we used for the encryption, it's no longer exposed. And so to get that password is quite difficult, and so that's what we want to see there. So you might be wondering, well, how could I sort of demonstrate that outside of the programming world? And we could do that by just creating a simple table here. So what we could do is we could go to Table Design, and I'll create a user ID field with an auto number, and we'll put a username field in there with a short text data type, and we'll put a user password in with a long text, since the hashes can get quite long, and that should be good enough for now. We'll put a primary key on that user ID field, and that will do it for our table. So I'll hit save there, and I'll call this TBL user. And so now we could have a table that has usernames and passwords in it. I will not build the login screen and all of that stuff, because all of you guys do it differently, and there's a million ways that you can do it. That's a whole episode unto itself. But what we will do is we'll demonstrate getting the hash into the table, then making an attempt to compare a value that we would like to try against the hash value to see if we're right or wrong. And that's typically what you do when you do a password check. And so here we go. I created, with the form wizard, I just created a very simple columnar form here, and it's based off of that little table that I created. And so now we can put in a username, and we can put in a password. But first we need a button, and so we'll right click on that tab there, and we'll go to Design View, and I'll choose a button from the controls, and I'll just drop it onto the form there, and I can click cancel on the wizard that pops up, and we're just going to do this manually. So what we will do is we can go to the other tab. We're going to give this a name that makes sense to our application. I'll call it CMD set, and then we can go to the format tab would be next, and we'll add a caption that makes sense. So we'll call that set password, and that will be our set password, which would simulate a user putting in their first password. And so we'll go to the event tab on that button. We'll click on the ellipsis to the right, the three dots, go to the code builder, and then click OK. And you can see our coding window pops up here, and we get a subroutine, private sub, which is our CMD set underscore click, which handles the click event So every time you click that button, it's going to try to set that value in that field. This is just for demonstration. Obviously, if we were doing a full, login screen and all that kind of stuff, that's going to have a whole bunch of different programming. But we just want to be able to set that hash into a field, so we're going to do that. So we'll create some variables here. We'll go, we'll create a string for our password. We'll create a string for our hash. And then using our utility, we'll convert the password to a hash and then put it into the field and save it. And that's a one-way conversion. We cannot decrypt it. And the decrypted value will go into that user password field that you saw there when I pulled the window down. And so now we can go ahead and start coding. So what I'll do is I'll say, our password string will be equal to a concatenation of zero length string and me user passwords, which could be null. You could also use is null if me user password is null, but we're going to do it this way today, where I'm going to make a string and I'll say if the length of the string is greater than 0, then we'll go ahead and create our hash and put it into the field. And so we'll use our utility, which we put in our module there. Our module gets access to that, and so we'll say our hash is equal to encrypt or decrypt, get hash as the option, and then we'll put in the password, and then we'll put that value that we got back into the user password field. And that's really all we want to do with this subroutine here. So we grabbed our password, we loaded that using the user password control there, or field from the table. If the length of it was greater than 0, we're going to get the encrypt or decrypt result using the get hash option there, and that's going to do it for us. So now if I go to our form view, we've got our first record that we started there with Wendy in there. And so Wendy's going to have a user password, and you could add all kinds of restrictions on the password and things like that, but we'll put in funky password for today, and when I hit set password, you can see we get our hash in the database here, and that's exactly what we want to see. And so if we had another user, say Bob, and he had ASDF 123 ABC, and we hit the set password for the first step of the password, getting the hash in there, that's what we want to see. So he gets this big long hash, which is not decryptable, but we can compare to it. And so that would really be the next step. Is what we want to do is we want to be able to try some password against the hash, even though we cannot decrypt the hash value like we can with the other values that from the other functions. We can try to guess what it is, or if we actually know what it is, then that works great for passwords. And so we'll create a new button just like we did before. We'll call it CMD try, or pardon me, CMD password try, and we'll give that a try as well. So we, just like before, we'll go to the event tab, click on the ellipsis, click on the code builder, and then go OK, and you'll see we get another subroutine, which is also an event handler. It handles the command password try button click event, and so we want to use that click. So every time you click that button, we want this stuff to happen. And so just like we did in the previous example, we're going to create a couple of variables. We'll create the password and the hash variable again, just like we did before, and except this time we're going to load the variables a little bit differently because we're doing some different stuff here. And so in this case, what we'll do is we'll say our password is equal to an input box. We'll ask that or prompt it from the user. We'll say, hey, what's the password? And we'll go, please enter the user's password. And then we can give it a title. We'll say password. We'll call this the password box if I could type. And we are good to go. So there we go. We've got our input box there, that's going to ask the user, hey, what do you think the password for this user is? And then we can hash the attempt using the same method that we used for creating the password, or the hashed password. And so if the two are equal, then we've got a match. Now, before we get going further, we are going to need to have a result string, because we need to have a pass or fail. We need to load that into a string so that we can evaluate it in our code if we have, say, a login form or something like that. And so we'll do the same thing we did before. We'll say, you know, our hash is equal to what's in the user password field, because now we've got a hash in that field. We do not have plain text, and so we're going to get that hash value in there, and then we'll load our result string using the new hash check function that's in our Encrypt setup here. And so we're going to check that password against the hash, and that is going to give us a result of pass or fail. And so we can, at this point, I think we can just give a message box saying yes or no, or pass or fail, I should say. And we'll say message box. Oh, got to put some quotes in there. Our message box is the result was, and then pass or fail. So we'll put in the str result there, whatever we got back from the hash check, and then we can give it a little styling here. We'll put a VB information on there and a title result, and that really should do it for that function. Today we're just demonstrating whether we can compare, so we'll do a debug compile, which is a great idea. You can see I already broke it there. I mistyped hash there, so let's try that again, see if anything else is broken. That should do it. Okay, so we're good to go. Like before, we have our password now, which is in plain text this time, and we have the hash, which of course is in a hashed format, encrypted format, and we're going to compare when we convert our password to hash whether the two hashes match, and then we'll say if they match, great, you get a pass, otherwise fail. And so that should do it. Let's go back to our form view and see if we can remember. Oh, I can't remember what I put in those first two users, so those are gone forever. So I have to make a new one, I think. So let's make a new one. So these ones are completely, I can't remember. I could go back, I guess I recorded it, but let's just create a new one for comparison here. So we'll go new record, and we'll add a new user, Susan, and we'll say set password, ABC funky password, and Susan will have a password here that we can actually remember. I'll put some special characters on there, and this time I'll copy it into my clipboard, Control C, and now I can set it to the hash value. So that's one way. I cannot decrypt that, but I can try to guess it. So now I can go, hey, try this. Hey, can I try, you know, ASDF, and the result I get is fail. And like I said, you can change those pass or fail messages in the config file to be something else. If I paste in the real password, there it is, there's our pass. So that person could log in. That's what we want to see there. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, and we could try it again, you know, put in some other value, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can see that will return a fail because it would not encrypt and then hash to the right value. If I put the right password in again, I do get a pass there. Now make sure you check out the previous encryption video with the deployment scenario so that you understand how the config files and the options work. And also make sure to check out my downloads page, which has this code. Want to see more topics like these? Make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description.